In late 1978, authorities made a gruesome discovery beneath the suburban Chicago home of John Wayne Gacy. Gacy had slain 33 young men and teens in the 1970s and concealed most of their bodies within his property. Among the remains unearthed was Body 10, the designation given to the 10th set of remains exhumed from Gacy's crawl space on December 26, 1978. This victim's skeletal remains were found buried in the dirt under Gacy's Norwood Park Township house, alongside many others. Even by the time of discovery, the John Doe known as Body 10 had been dead long enough to be completely skeletonized. Forensic examiners determined the remains belonged to a white male estimated to be between 17 and 21 years old, and approximately 5 feet 7 inches to 5 feet 11 inches in height. Any soft tissue was long gone, so the cause of death couldn't be identified, though given the circumstances, there was no real question why he had met his end. Investigators did observe a couple of distinctive clues from the bones. The victim had once broken his left collarbone, an injury that had healed well before his death, and his teeth showed evidence of dental work such as fillings. These details suggested that this individual had a life that might be traceable. Based on the burial pattern and positions of bodies in the crawl space, police later theorized this victim was likely killed sometime in mid-1977. This made him one of Gacy's later victims before the final spree of 1978. However, at the time of the initial investigation, his exact identity and timeline remained a mystery. When Body 10 was first examined by the Cook County Medical Examiner's Office in 1979, every effort was made to identify him using the forensic techniques available at the time. Because the remains were skeletal, unsurprisingly, fingerprints couldn't be obtained, but forensic dentists charted the victim's teeth in detail. Dental records were one of the main tools in 1970s forensic identification, so investigators compared Body 10's dental characteristics against missing persons reports. To aid identification, experts created a clay forensic facial reconstruction from the skull. Despite these efforts, in the first year after Gacy's arrest, the authorities were unable to put a name to Body 10. By March 1979, Gacy had been charged with 33 slayings, and eventually 28 of those victims were identified by name. The remaining victims, including Body 10, were left as John Doe cases, known only by the numbers assigned when their bodies were recovered. The police publicized descriptions of the unidentified victims in the hope that someone would recognize a missing friend or family member. In the case of Body 10, no match was made. After Gacy's trial in 1980, the unidentified remains, including Body 10, were interred in local cemeteries. Crucially, while DNA testing wasn't available at the time, it was a technology that was known to be on what then seemed like a distant horizon. From the beginning, detectives generated a list of young men who went missing in the mid-1970s and could potentially be Body 10. Over the years, numerous leads emerged. Families who wondered if their long-lost son or brother had fallen prey to Gacy and might correspond to one of the unidentified bodies. Some of these leads seemed promising, but ultimately didn't pan out as investigators hoped. For example, one candidate was Michael D. Mansfield, a 19-year-old who disappeared from Rolling Meadows, Illinois on New Year's Eve, 1975. Mansfield fit the general profile, a Midwestern teen who vanished in roughly the right time frame, and for a time was suspected as a Gacy victim. Decades later, however, a separate deathbed confession implicated someone else in Mansfield's disappearance. A number of other theories have been investigated, but every result had thus far been a dead end. Over time, a few more speculative theories arose. One theory even suggested that Body 10 might have been an earlier victim than initially believed. Under this theory, He was possibly slain as far back as 1972, making him one of Gacy's first victims chronologically. This idea stemmed from Gacy's own statements. Gayy once claimed that his second victim was buried in the crawl space near the first victim's remains. Because Body 10's grave in the crawl space was relatively close to where Gacy's first victim was buried, some wondered if Body 10 could actually be that mysterious second victim. However, prosecutors at Gacy's trial doubted this timeline, believing that he likely had no victims from 1972 to 1975 while his wife was living in the house. In any case, no solid clues to this individual's name emerged in the original investigation, and the case languished for decades with little new information. For decades, the identities of John Wayne Gacy's unnamed victims remained frustratingly elusive. In 2011, Cook County Sheriff Tom Dart launched a groundbreaking initiative. He hoped to harness advanced DNA technology to finally solve mysteries that traditional methods and earlier DNA testing had failed to unravel. The sheriff's team carefully exhumed 8 unidentified victims, as well as extract DNA from the remains that had initially remained unburied and preserved. These samples were sent to the University of North Texas Center for Human Identification, a lab specializing in challenging forensic cases. This initiative led to numerous breakthroughs, with 3 cases being solved over the next decade. The most recent identification came in 2021, with a then remarkable use of forensic genetic genealogy. Victim 5 was identified as Francis Wayne Alexander, a North Carolina native whose family connections were pieced together with the assistance of the DNA Doe Project. Thanks to these efforts, what had once been 8 unnamed victims was reduced to 5 remaining unidentified victims. Body 10 is one of those 5 who still await identification. In a 2023 interview, Sheriff Dart revealed that his team has at least one promising lead they're following, though he warned nothing is certain yet. Today, nearly 50 years after the John Doe known only as Body 10 was pulled from that crawl space, he remains unnamed, but not forgotten. Investigators emphasize that he was someone's son, friend, and possibly brother, and they're determined to reunite his remains with a name and family. I hope to have an update on this case in the near future, since I strongly suspect that this will be yet another case which is solved through the use of genetic genealogy. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here, just reminding you to check out Lazy Chill True Crime wherever you get your podcasts. Also remember to like, subscribe, and check out the YouTube membership or the Patreon to take your support for my channels to the next level. Bachelors Grove lies in a secluded patch of Rubio Woods, a forest preserve just outside Chicago. This cemetery has become notorious for its connection to famous hauntings, and unlike many other famously haunted places, there's photographic evidence of one of the ghosts here. Established in the mid-19th century, this tiny burial ground once served a thriving pioneer settlement. Early homesteaders began burying their dead here in the 1830s and 1840s. The origin of its name is hotly debated. One of the most popular stories says it comes from a group of unmarried men who settled the area. This is the sort of background that adds to the lonely mystique of this isolated cemetery, and unsurprisingly, this is the lore that most people seem to prefer. Local historians, on the other hand, point out that it may have been named after the Batchelder family who lived nearby. Either way, by the 1840s the locale was known as Bachelors Grove, and over the next decades it became the final resting place for dozens of local settlers. The first recorded burial dates to 1838, and interments continued into the early 20th century. As transportation routes shifted, the once busy settlement dwindled. A new railroad built in the 1850s bypassed Bachelors Grove, luring residents and businesses to larger towns with train service. Some families even relocated their loved ones' remains to cemeteries nearer to those growing towns. By the mid-1900s, Bachelors Grove Cemetery had fallen into severe decline, and the last official burial took place in 1989, and afterwards the site was largely abandoned. With no regular caretakers, the graveyard became overgrown and neglected. Isolated in the woods, it drew the attention of local youth as a hidden hangout spot for late-night parties away from watchful eyes. Unfortunately, this also meant vandalism. Tombstones were toppled, defaced, and even stolen over the years. Broken grave markers found their way into the adjacent pond, and nearby police stations accumulated recovered headstones. Such desecration set an eerie stage, a once serene pioneer graveyard now scarred by graffiti and damage, shrouded in tall weeds and silence. It's in this atmosphere that the legends began to take root. Local lore suggests that by the 1950s, strange tales were already circulating about Bachelors Grove. With the cemetery's increasing remoteness, people started whispering of unexplained sights in the woods. In fact, authorities noted that as vandalism and teenage mischief peaked, so did reports of paranormal activity. The cemetery gained a haunted reputation, magnified by word of mouth and a spooky ambiance of rustling leaves and broken monuments. According to the lore, some of the cemetery's own caretakers may have inadvertently fueled the myth. One former worker, tired of trespassers, would hide in the dark and fire a shotgun in the air to scare off intruders. It's easy to imagine how terrified teenagers, fleeing through shadowy woods, might later swear they encountered something otherworldly. Though in my view, an angry gravekeeper blasting a shotgun into the air late at night is a lot scarier than a ghost. By the 1970s, Bachelors Grove had become famous among ghost hunters and curiosity seekers as one of the most haunted places in America. More than 100 different paranormal incidents have since been documented, a staggering number for a 1-acre graveyard. Over the decades, Bachelors Grove Cemetery has become a hotbed of ghostly lore. Among the most enduring legends is the Phantom Farmhouse. Visitors have reported seeing an old-fashioned farmhouse glowing in the distance between the trees. The apparition is often described as a white 2-story house with a porch light appearing at night where no house truly stands. Startled witnesses say as they try to approach, the building shrinks or fades, ultimately vanishing when they get too close. This floating house has no confirmed historical counterpart on that exact spot, or even in the area. However, this ghost house pales in comparison to the true superstar of Bachelors Grove. Perhaps the most famous specter here is the White Lady, often called the Madonna of Bachelors Grove. This ghostly woman in white has been sighted drifting through the cemetery, sometimes cradling an infant in her arms. Many encounters occur on clear nights with a full moon. Witnesses describe her as wearing a flowing white dress or shroud, her face often obscured or downcast, as if in mournful search of something or someone. According to local legend, she's thought to be the spirit of a young mother buried in the cemetery next to her child. In fact, one of the remaining headstones simply reads, "Infant Daughter," and some tie this grave to the Lady in White's story. The connection between a mother and lost child, combined with the cemetery's tragic aura, gives this legend an emotional resonance. The White Lady of the Grove might have stayed just a typical ghost story, except that she was seemingly caught on camera. In 1991, a team of paranormal investigators with the Ghost Research Society visited Bachelors Grove and captured a truly iconic ghost photograph. Using infrared film, they snapped a daytime image that, once developed, revealed a lone woman sitting on a broken tombstone. She appears in an old-fashioned gown with long hair, her form faintly translucent. The researchers who were there that day swore no living person was in the cemetery at that moment at that location. The photo was published in newspapers across America, as was the style at the time, and soon the Madonna of Bachelors Grove went viral in paranormal circles. To believers, it was validation of the White Lady's presence, a ghost caught on film, gazing forlornly over her resting place. Skeptics proposed more mundane explanations, from photographic anomalies to an outright hoax. Whether this is a true image of a ghost or a clever hoax or some accidental anomaly, it remains the centerpiece of Bachelors Grove lore. The Lady in White isn't the only apparition said to roam here. Shadowy figures are frequently reported along the lonely access path and among the trees. In the 1980s, visitors described seeing several figures in monk-like robes silently walking the grounds. By the time anyone approached, these mysterious robed silhouettes disappeared without a trace. Not all the eerie experiences involve full-bodied apparitions. Many visitors speak of mysterious lights and other sensory anomalies. Glowing orbs of light, often red or blue, have been seen flitting through the trees or hovering above tombstones at night. These ghost lights sometimes zip down the deserted trail and then blink out when pursued. Photographers over the years have also captured strange floating spheres or mists on film. Besides visual phenomena, people have reported disembodied sounds, including the echo of a baby crying in the distance and phantom footsteps on the gravel path. With so many ghost stories tied to one location, people naturally wonder what makes Bachelors Grove Cemetery such a hotbed of hauntings. Everyone from paranormal investigators to hardcore skeptics have offered a range of theories. One common idea is the residual energy theory, the notion that past events can imprint on a location and replay over time like a recording. Bachelors Grove, with its long history, could be rich in such imprints according to advocates of this theory. In this view, the phantom farmhouse and the Lady in White might be residual, rather than an interactive ghost. These manifestations don't respond to the living. They simply play out their eternal routines. In this theory, these are essentially NPCs playing out a scripted action over and over again. Another mystical hypothesis involves ley lines, invisible lines of geoenergetic force that crisscross the Earth in New Age and occult lore. Some paranormal enthusiasts suggest that Bachelors Grove sits at the intersection of ley lines or other energy nexuses. In theory, such intersections create supernatural hotspots where the veil between the physical world and the spirit world is thinner. If true, that could explain why so many different phenomena concentrate in one tiny graveyard. It could also explain why every graveyard doesn't exhibit similar phenomenon. Of course, ley lines are not scientifically recognized, and this idea is more spiritual than factual. Still, for believers in the theory, this offers what they believe to be an internally consistent explanation for why this and other sites are so spiritually significant. Meanwhile, skeptical investigators offer down-to-earth explanations for nearly every legend. From their perspective, Bachelors Grove's isolation and appearance make it a perfect stage for misinterpretation. Visit on a quiet night and you're enveloped in darkness, with only moonlight and the sounds of nature. In such conditions, the human mind can play tricks. Car headlights from a far-off road could reflect oddly, creating the illusion of a phantom farmhouse or phantom vehicle. The swampy pond can emit swamp gas that glows bluish and could be mistaken for something supernatural. Likewise, gnarled tree stumps through the mist may resemble figures in robes. Psychologists note that expectation is powerful. If you expect to see a ghost, you are more likely to interpret a rustling branch as a specter. Bachelors Grove has an international reputation now, and anyone walking in has already heard it's haunted. In fact, there's literally no reason to ever end up in this location unless you're going out there to see what the big deal is about this haunted cemetery. To skeptics, it's no surprise people report exactly the things they've been primed to see. To them, this is simply the power of suggestion at work in a spooky setting. Whether the Bachelors Grove cemetery hauntings are something supernatural or much more mundane, will continue to remain a fascinating unsolved mystery. On May 31st, 2018, locals near an apartment complex playground in Cincinnati's North Avondale neighborhood made an extremely grim discovery. In a shallow grave by the play area, they found the partially buried body of an older woman. A single rose had been delicately placed on the woman's chest, a haunting detail that later earned her the nickname, the Rose Lady. The victim had been wrapped in cloth and left with no identification, immediately presenting investigators with a tragic mystery. The Hamilton County coroner took charge of the case and quickly found clues about the cause of death. An autopsy revealed the woman had substances in her system, pointing to an overdose rather than foul play as the likely cause. With no obvious identification, investigators collected the unknown woman's fingerprints and DNA and checked them against national databases, but no matches turned up. As months turned into years with no answers, the coroner's office turned to public outreach. They released a composite sketch of the Jane Doe's face, and later even commissioned a 3D clay reconstruction of her likeness, hoping someone would recognize her. Despite these exhaustive public appeals and repeated assurances that no foul play was suspected, no leads materialized. The Rose Lady remained unidentified, an enduring mystery haunting local law enforcement. In 2023, the coroner's team even released lifelike digital renderings of the Jane Doe's face to rekindle public interest. Yet the case ultimately broke thanks to cutting-edge DNA analysis. The Hamilton County Coroner's Office used investigative genetic genealogy to trace potential relatives of the Rose Lady. Analysts discovered that her DNA profile intersected with a family tree that included a man who had died of an overdose in 2019. That man, identified in records as the Jane Doe's son, had been examined by the same coroner's office a year after the Jane Doe was found, without anyone realizing the connection. A direct comparison of the two individuals' DNA confirmed a parent-child relationship with absolute certainty. At long last, on May 23, 2025, the coroner announced that the Rose Lady had a name: Patricia Kalina Goodwin, who was 71 years old at the time of her death. News of Goodwin's identification brought answers for the family and poignant revelations for investigators. Her family, who lived in the Mason, Ohio area, had been searching for her since she vanished in 2018. Goodwin had become homeless in her later years, which contributed to the difficulty of finding her. Sadly, Goodwin's brother, who had long hoped for news, passed away just a month before the identification was made public, never knowing what happened to his sister. Still, for the rest of the family, there was a measure of closure in at last knowing her story. Even with Patricia Goodwin's identity known, one question lingered. How did she end up buried in that lonely makeshift grave with a rose on her chest? Investigators believe the answer lies in Goodwin's relationship with her son. Both mother and son were struggling with addiction and living on the streets at the time of her death. Evidence suggests that Goodwin's son, Jason, was present when she overdosed and died. A friend from their homeless encampment later told authorities that Jason had been with his mother around that time and that she had passed a year before him. Facing his mother's sudden death, it appears Jason chose to secretly bury her himself rather than alert anyone. In this view, the rose was a final act of love from a son saying goodbye. Because Jason died the next year, this tragic sequence of events can't be confirmed with absolute certainty. After 7 long years, the case of the Rose Lady is resolved, and through persistent investigation and modern forensics, Patricia Goodwin's name and story have been reclaimed. Yet the rose on her grave remains a symbol of the love and mystery that surrounded her final moments, and a touching reminder of the human stories behind every cold case. Between late 2008 and 2010, a series of mysterious acid attacks terrorized one of Hong Kong's bustling shopping districts. An unknown assailant hurled plastic bottles of corrosive liquid, believed to be drain cleaner, from building rooftops into the crowds below. In 4 separate attacks, around 130 people in total were injured. The brazenness of these crimes and the randomness of the victims shocked the city. Hong Kong enjoys a reputation as one of Asia's safest cities, so this kind of random violence was deeply unsettling. It left the public fearful that at any moment a very different form of acid rain might strike from above. The first attack came on December 13, 2008, around 5:15 p.m. during the busy Christmas shopping season. 2 bottles of acid were tossed from a building onto Sai Yung Choi Street, a crowded pedestrian shopping area. The bottles burst on the pavement and spewed corrosive fluid into the crowd, burning 46 people, though fortunately all victims sustained only minor injuries. Panicked shoppers ran for cover into nearby shops, where water was quickly poured on the ground to dilute the acid. Despite an intensive police search of surrounding buildings that went deep into the night, the perpetrator wasn't found. Even more curiously, no apparent clues or evidence was left behind by the mad tosser of Hong Kong. Just 5 months later, on May 16, 2009, a similar incident occurred near the first site. This time, 2 acid-filled bottles rained down in broad daylight, injuring 30 weekend shoppers. Hong Kong's chief executive, Donald Tsang, visited the scene and urged the district council to speed up installing surveillance cameras in the area. These surveillance cameras would come shortly, but they wouldn't have quite the effect the authorities were hoping for. Authorities also included a reward for information in hopes of a tip leading to the culprit. Shockingly, a third acid attack struck on June 8, 2009, reportedly only hours after the new CCTV system was activated in the area. 2 more acid-filled bottles were dropped at night, injuring another 24 people in the street below. Around 300 police officers rushed to the scene in an immediate manhunt, but once again, the mysterious attacker slipped away. The bold timing led local officials to suggest the mad tosser of Hong Kong was openly taunting law enforcement. Finally, on January 9, 2010, a 4th attack hit the crowded Temple Street night market. 2 bottles of corrosive liquid rained down onto evening diners and shoppers, and about 30 people were hurt in the chaos. During the panic, some quick-thinking bystanders blocked the exits of nearby buildings to prevent the throwers' escape. Police soon arrested a man in his 30s who was found hiding on a rooftop, carrying bottle caps that matched the acid bottles used. However, after overnight questioning, authorities announced this suspect was not the elusive mad bomber. Instead, he turned out to be an illegal immigrant who happened to be squatting in the area. Hong Kong police threw massive resources into the hunt for the acid attacker, but they faced an array of challenges. At each crime scene, officers sealed off the area and scoured nearby rooftops, stairwells, and windowsills for any evidence. They even reenacted the incidents by tossing test objects from different floors to determine the likely trajectory of the falling bottles. Investigators pored over security camera footage frame by frame, collecting about 200 video clips and identifying thousands of individuals who were in the vicinity during the attacks. One by one, they checked these persons of interest, a painstaking process that yielded no prime suspect. The anonymity of dense crowds and the attacker's ability to vanish into the maze of buildings made it extremely difficult to catch him. Police officials admitted it was nearly impossible to ever catch a culprit with no clear link to the victims and almost no eyewitnesses. With the investigation stalling, many theories emerged about who the culprit might be and why they did it. One early idea tossed out in the local media was that a triad gang member had staged the attacks as revenge, possibly in response to police crackdowns on vice activities in the area. However, crime experts largely dismissed the triad theory, noting that such random public attacks would only bring heavy police pressure and made little sense as a gang tactic. If the goal was to limit the presence of police in the area, going onto the roof and hurling bottles of acid into crowds of innocent people isn't the play. Still, the media ate this idea up and wasn't willing to let it go, despite it being completely implausible. That said, it is of course possible that a rogue element within a triad could have done something like this, but that brings me to the next theory. Instead, most officials and psychologists profiled the attacker as a likely lone wolf. The perpetrator showed no political or financial motive. There were no demands or messages, only a desire to inflict fear and pain. Psychologists suggested the culprit might have been driven by personal frustration or a sense of powerlessness. They suggested he likely found disturbing satisfaction in causing chaos and seeing it dominate the news. In other words, the attacks may have given this person a twisted feeling of power and control that he lacked in his own life. Indeed, one criminologist bluntly labeled the unknown assailant a madman for committing such acts without any rational motive. Another theory explored is that these attacks were carried out by the sort of person you'd least suspect. While the cops were out looking for a mad tosser lurking on the rooftops, some speculate that the true responsible party may have been someone in a position of either power or authority. Perhaps the individual who conducted the attacks was a cop who wanted to play hero in the investigation. Notably, there's numerous cases of firefighters starting blazes and then playing the hero, only to later be revealed as the perpetrator. Some online sleuths have speculated that the use of a rather mild form of acid supports this theory, since the point of the attack doesn't appear to have been to cause maximum harm. Another theory is even more sinister, suggesting that the attacks were perpetrated in an effort to expand the usage of surveillance systems on public streets in Hong Kong. Hong Kong was still quite democratic at the time period where this took place, and it's entirely possible that additional public support was required for this measure. That said, there's absolutely no evidence to support this, so this remains speculative. Even years later, Hong Kong police vowed not to shelve the investigation, and the case officially remained open. To date, however, the perpetrator of the acid attacks has never been identified or caught, and the authorities seem no closer to resolving the case now than they ever were before. In the spring of 1883, a gruesome incident on a remote ranch near Eagle Creek in southeastern Arizona shook the entire frontier community. Two ranchers had left to tend livestock, leaving their wives behind. Around midday, one wife stepped outside to fetch water when she heard dogs frantically barking and then a piercing human scream. The other woman ran to the window and saw a gigantic reddish beast stampede past, carrying what looked like a devilish rider on its back. Panicked, she barricaded the door until the men returned. That evening, they found the other woman's body trampled in the mud. Enormous cloven hoof prints scarred the ground, and clumps of long red hair clung to nearby bushes. The monster had vanished, and the stunned ranchers had no idea what creature they were dealing with. News of the attack spread quickly through the Arizona territory. Some of the Spanish-speaking locals even began calling the creature a name that translated as the Red Ghost, and the name stuck in English as well. In the weeks that followed, similar incidents were blamed on the Red Ghost. A miners' camp was allegedly assaulted in the dark, and a freight wagon train was attacked by a giant red animal at night. In each case, people found the same signs the next morning: huge hoof prints and tufts of coarse reddish hair left behind. As the legend grew, so did the embellishments. Some swore the beast vanished like a specter when pursued, or that it devoured a grizzly bear. Obvious frontier exaggerations. Yet everyone agreed on one point. The beast carried a human skeleton on its back, strapped in place with ropes or rawhide. The legend truly took hold after one encounter produced hard evidence. A group of prospectors spotted the Red Ghost on a distant mesa and opened fire, attempting to bring the creature in. They missed the beast, but as it fled, something fell from its back. When the men approached, they discovered a human skull with bits of dried flesh and hair still clinging to it. This gruesome find confirmed that the spectral rider wasn't actually a ghost at all, but were the bleached remains of a man. Some began to suspect that the Red Ghost might be a camel. In fact, just a few decades earlier, the Army had imported camels to the Southwest, hoping they could serve as pack animals in the desert. The camels survived the harsh climate well, but they spooked other animals and proved difficult for cavalrymen, familiar with horses, to handle. The Civil War interrupted this Camel Corps experiment, and the Army eventually abandoned the project. Many camels were sold off or processed into camel steaks, but others were simply turned loose into the wild. By the 1880s, sightings of feral camels in Arizona weren't uncommon. This history offered a plausible explanation for the Red Ghost. It was likely one of those abandoned camels, albeit one saddled with a ghastly extra passenger. According to traditional tellings, in 1893, the Red Ghost met its end. A farmer spotted a massive red camel grazing on his land and decided to cut it down with a single blast. Personally, that wouldn't be my first thought if I saw a camel on my property, but to each their own, I suppose. On examining the fallen beast, he found rawhide straps still wrapped around its body, indicating that it was a camel that had gone feral at some point. According to traditional Arizona camel lore, this fact confirmed that this was indeed the camel that previously had the skeleton strapped to it. With the creature slain, the question remained: whose bones were those, and how did they end up on a camel's back? In the aftermath, various explanations arose. One story held that the skeleton was a desperate prospector who lashed himself to a camel, hoping it would lead him to water. If this story is true, I think this prospector should have done some more reading on camels first. Last I checked, a camel is just about the worst animal to strap yourself to in hopes that it'll lead you to a drink. Another claimed the victim was forcibly tied to the camel and sent out into the desert, surely dooming the man. According to this version of events, the pattern of the binding supported the idea that someone else had tied the man onto the animal. In other words, a cruel human act, rather than something supernatural, potentially led to the Red Ghost's tragic creation. After the Red Ghost's demise, reports of wild camels in Arizona dwindled, and by the early 20th century, the last of the Camel Corps strays had died off or been captured. Notably, skeptics question whether the story of the camel being shot down in 1893 is true at all, or whether that's simply part of the legend. The only parts of the story that can truly be verified is the fact that people in late 19th century Arizona believed Red Ghost existed. A camel sighting would have likely been quite jarring, and there were numerous feral camels, so it makes perfect sense that a mythos would have developed around them. At the end of the day, this ghostly dromedary may be nothing more than an Old West tall tale that's come down to us modern people as at least having a kernel of truth. On a crisp March morning in 2012, a white Ford Escape sat abandoned at the Newfound Gap overlook in Great Smoky Mountains National Park, a silent witness to an unfolding mystery. Its owner, 24-year-old Derek Lucking, had vanished into the wilderness before dawn. Derek was by all accounts a responsible young man and a recent college graduate, but that day he was nowhere to be found. Inside his vehicle lay one eerie clue, a handwritten note that read, "Don't come find me." Derek lived in Louisville, Tennessee, not far from the Smokies. In the weeks leading up to his disappearance, he had been unhappy with the direction of his life. Family members noticed he wasn't acting like himself, he grew withdrawn, and even picked up some uncharacteristic habits like drinking and smoking. These were small red flags, but nothing to suggest what was about to happen. On Wednesday, March 14th, 2012, Derek left home unexpectedly, sometime during the night. The next morning, he failed to show up for work. His roommate found Derek's alarm clock ringing in an empty room and knew something was wrong. Calls to Derek's phone went unanswered. Alarmed, the roommate contacted Derek's parents in Virginia, and they began a frantic overnight drive to Tennessee to search for their son. When Derek's parents arrived and checked his computer for clues, they discovered he'd been researching Great Smoky Mountains National Park. More tellingly, he had reserved a hotel room for the night of March 16th in Cherokee, North Carolina, just outside the park. Clinging to hope, his parents headed toward Cherokee, thinking they might intercept him there. Early on Saturday, March 17th, surveillance cameras at a motel in Cherokee captured Derek in the lobby around 4 a.m. He checked out and walked into the pre-dawn darkness, carrying a small day pack. This was the last confirmed sighting of him. When his parents reached the hotel later that morning, they learned they had just missed Derek. Inside the room he left, they found a Bible on the bed and an empty liquor bottle on the floor, objects that hinted at a personal crisis during his final night. Shortly afterward, as Derek's family drove back through the park, they spotted his Ford Escape parked at Newfound Gap, a scenic pass on the Tennessee-North Carolina state line. The car was empty, and fearing the worst but determined to find him, they alerted park rangers immediately. Investigators opened the vehicle and discovered an assortment of newly purchased camping gear and supplies inside. Derek had clearly been preparing for an outdoor excursion. There was a tent, a sleeping bag, tools, maps, food rations, and a survival guide. Strangely, all that equipment was left behind in the car. Derek hadn't taken the tent, the sleeping bag, or most of the supplies with him, only what he could fit in his pack. His wallet, identification cards, and cash were also in the vehicle. And on the dashboard was that ominous note, "Don't come find me." It now seemed that Derek had walked into the woods of his own accord, for reasons unknown. Park rangers and search teams sprang into action as soon as Derek was reported missing. The park was busy with visitors that day, yet no one remembered seeing a hiker matching Derek's description. On that clear spring morning, he had slipped away unseen. Searchers initially combed the popular trails from Newfound Gap, calling his name and looking for any sign of him. When that yielded nothing, they pushed into the rugged woods off the trails. For days, teams of rangers, volunteers, and search dogs scoured steep ridges and creek valleys near where the car was found. They looked for footprints, scraps of clothing, or any other clue, but found none, Derek had only a light day pack with him and was not an experienced outdoorsman, which made his situation even more precarious. After about a week of intense searching, not a single trace of him turned up. As the days passed with no results, the official search was eventually scaled back. Derek had effectively vanished without a single trace. In the absence of answers, a few theories have been put forward to explain what might have happened to Derek Lucking. One theory is that Derek intended to vanish on his own and start a new life. The note he left strongly suggests he did not want to be found. Perhaps he was overwhelmed by his life and saw escape as the answer. It's possible he staged his hike into the Smokies as a diversion, then quietly slipped away from the area. Abandoning his car and ID, he effectively shed his old identity. While no evidence has surfaced that he resettled somewhere else, he could have managed to stay off the grid. Another theory is that Derek was in a disturbed state of mind and went into the wilderness intending not to return. He had been struggling emotionally, and the timing of his disappearance reportedly coincided with the anniversary of his grandfather's death. The Bible and empty liquor bottle in his hotel room suggest he might have been wrestling with despair or seeking courage before venturing out. In this view, the note in his car reads like a final goodbye to his friends and family. However, since no remains were found despite extensive searching, this heartbreaking scenario is unconfirmed, and his family holds out hope that it isn't what happened. A third theory is that Derek ventured into the mountains on a personal survival challenge but fell victim to a mishap. And surprisingly, there is some circumstantial evidence to support this. He was reportedly a big fan of Bear Grylls, who was very well known at the time for his show Man vs. Wild. Perhaps he wanted to test himself by going off trail with only basic supplies, though that doesn't explain the supplies that were left behind. Unfortunately, the Smoky Mountain wilderness is unforgiving, especially for someone alone and inexperienced. It's easy to get lost, injured, or succumb to exposure in the steep, tangled terrain. If Derek was hurt or stranded far from the trails, the vast expanse of the park could have kept him hidden from rescuers. In this scenario, his disappearance was a tragic accident. He underestimated the wilderness, and nature simply hid all traces of what happened. A final theory is that Derek encountered danger in the form of another person. Some have speculated he could have stumbled upon an illicit activity, or met someone with bad intentions in the woods. Of course, this is entirely possible, but ultimately no evidence supports this idea. There were no signs of a struggle or theft at his car, and all his valuables were left untouched. No witness reports or leads have ever pointed to any crime whatsoever. Without any concrete clues suggesting foul play, investigators consider this the least likely explanation, though it can't be completely ruled out. More than a decade has passed since Derek Lucking walked into the Smoky Mountains and vanished, and no trace of him has ever been found. His family has never stopped seeking answers, and the case remains open. Precognition, the purported ability to foresee future events before they occur, has fascinated humanity for millennia. Rooted in the idea that the future might not be entirely random or unknowable, the concept has been central to countless myths, religious beliefs, and even scientific investigations. The idea of precognition dates back to ancient times. In many early societies, individuals claiming the ability to see the future were revered as shamans, prophets, oracles, or seers. The ancient Greeks, for example, sought guidance from the Oracle of Delphi, who was believed to channel the god Apollo to predict future events. Similarly, in ancient Rome, augurs interpreted signs, such as the flight of birds, to provide insights about what lay ahead. Religious traditions also embraced the concept of foreseeing the future. In Jewish and Christian traditions, precognitive visions are attributed to biblical figures like Joseph and Daniel, who interpreted dreams and predicted events through divine intervention. Across Asia, Hinduism and Buddhism incorporate the idea of spiritual enlightenment, granting insight into the future. In the modern era, precognition shifted from religious and mystical contexts to psychological and scientific scrutiny. During the 19th and early 20th centuries, the rise of the spiritualist movement brought renewed interest in psychic phenomena, including precognition. Mediums often claimed they could predict future events through communication with spirits or accessing some universal knowledge. While the history of precognition is steeped in mysticism, science has approached the topic cautiously. Broadly, scientific theories about precognition can be divided into two camps: those that claim it as a real phenomenon and those that attribute it to cognitive or psychological mechanisms. Proponents of precognition argue that it may stem from abilities yet to be understood by science. Quantum mechanics has sometimes been invoked as a potential explanation, particularly concepts like non-locality and entanglement. Theoretical physicists like Roger Penrose and others have speculated about how the mind might access information outside the conventional flow of time, though these ideas remain speculative. Studies in parapsychology, such as experiments using random number generators, have sought to demonstrate precognitive abilities. One researcher, for example, conducted experiments where participants predicted future randomly generated events, such as the display of emotionally charged images. His results suggested that participants performed slightly better than chance, though critics have questioned the methodology and statistical rigor of such studies. Further, there's been difficulties replicating this study, which suggests that perhaps it wasn't very accurate at all. Skeptics argue that precognition can be explained through psychological mechanisms. The human brain is adept at recognizing patterns and making predictions based on incomplete information. What may feel like precognition could simply be subconscious processing of existing cues. For example, someone might predict a car accident after noticing subtle signs of reckless driving, but not consciously realizing they've done so. Another explanation is retroactive bias, where individuals reinterpret past events to fit a precognitive narrative. For instance, a dream about fire might feel prophetic after a house fire occurs, even if the dream was vague and open to many interpretations. This phenomenon, called confirmation bias, plays a significant role in shaping how people perceive precognition. Claims of precognition are inherently difficult to prove or disprove. Scientific evidence remains inconclusive, as studies often produce conflicting results or are plagued by methodological flaws. On the other hand, anecdotal evidence abounds. People often report experiences of déjà vu or vivid dreams that seem to predict future events. However, it's important to remember that there are literally 8 billion people in the world. Every person makes numerous forecasts about the future, either consciously or subconsciously, throughout the day. While it's impossible to quantify how many predictions human brains make per day, it's fairly certain that this number is astronomically high. Statistically, some predictions are bound to come true by chance alone.